The story of King Solomon is one of divine wisdom and human failure. We are told he had 700 wives and 300 concubines, 1,000 women who led his heart astray from God. For centuries, this has been preached from pulpits as a cautionary tale, the great moral collapse of the wisest king who ever lived. But what if this isn't the whole story? What if the official account is a veil, deliberately woven to conceal a spiritual strategy so dangerous it had to be buried? What if I told you that each of these marriages was not a sin of passion, but a calculated act of spiritual warfare, a terrifying attempt to bind the principalities and ruling spirits of 1,000 foreign lands? Imagine for a moment that King Solomon wasn't just building a kingdom on earth, but waging a secret war in the heavens, using marriage covenants as his weapon. This is a truth that changes everything we thought we knew about him. This isn't a simple story of a man's weakness. It is a glimpse into a level of spiritual conflict that was intentionally erased from our common understanding. The clues were left behind, hidden between the lines of the Book of Kings and sealed within ancient rabbinic traditions, texts considered too potent, too revealing for the uninitiated. They speak of a king who sought to subdue the gods of the nations under the dominion of the God of Israel. If you have ever felt that there is more to the biblical narrative than what is taught on a Sunday morning, then you are in the right place. Stay with me, because we are about to pull back the curtain on one of history's most profound secrets, and what you will discover will challenge and deepen your faith in ways you never expected. The official account leaves a gaping hole in the narrative. Have you ever truly considered it? The Bible tells us that the wisest man who ever lived, a man who spoke directly with God, was led astray by foreign women, but it offers no deep explanation for this catastrophic failure. It's as if a crucial chapter was torn from the book, leaving us with a simple moral lesson when the truth is a complex, terrifying tapestry of spiritual ambition. The scriptures themselves give us a clue, a paradox that is rarely, if ever, discussed from the pulpit. In 1 Kings 4, we are told, God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure. So why, in chapter 11, does this same man act with such profound foolishness? How does a mind as vast as the seashore simply forget the first commandment? This isn't just a contradiction, it's a signpost pointing us towards a truth that has been intentionally obscured, a truth that suggests his actions were not born of weakness, but of a wisdom so deep it became dangerous. Here we must dare to ask the question that changes everything. What if Solomon's marriages were not a sin of the flesh, but a calculated strategy of the spirit? What if he saw each marriage not as a political alliance, but as a spiritual covenant, a way to bind the demonic principalities and territorial spirits worshipped by each of the 1,000 nations his wives represented? He wasn't collecting wives, he was attempting to collect their gods, to subdue them under the authority of the God of Israel through sacred, binding pacts. This was a secret war waged in the unseen realm. The Bible records the result of this war, his fall into idolatry, but it sealed away the motive. Ancient commentaries, texts deemed too potent for the masses, speak of this. They describe rituals performed and vows sworn that went far beyond a simple marriage ceremony. Solomon wasn't just building temples for his wives' gods to appease them. He was building spiritual embassies to engage them, to challenge them, and ultimately to control them. But what power was he trying to harness, and what forbidden knowledge did he use to do it? The answer lies in the very nature of the covenants he made. The answers are not found in the pages we are encouraged to read. They lie in the shadows, in the texts that were set aside. Ancient Jewish traditions, like the Midrash and the sealed commentaries on the Book of Kings, speak of a different Solomon. They don't describe a lovesick king, but a master of spiritual lore, a man who understood the architecture of the unseen world. These texts are the puzzle pieces that were intentionally swept under the rug. They speak of covenants that were more than just marriage vows. They were spiritual chains, designed to bind the very gods of the nations his wives came from. Think of the biblical account as the public record, the official story. It tells us what Solomon did. He built high places for Ashtaroth, for Chemosh, for Molech. But these forgotten texts provide the classified intelligence, the hidden motive explaining why. They suggest that each altar was not an act of worship, but a point of contact, a spiritual anchor. He wasn't bowing to these entities, he was summoning them, creating a physical foothold for them within his kingdom, all in a terrifying effort to study, contain, and ultimately neutralize them. It was a strategy of breathtaking ambition, a spiritual gambit of the highest order. This is why the full story was erased. The scribes and prophets who compiled the scriptures faced a terrible choice. How could they record that the wisest king of Israel delved into practices so close to forbidden magic, even if his intentions were to magnify the God of Israel? The risk was too great.
The knowledge was too dangerous. It was far safer to present his story as a simple moral failure, a lesson about the weakness of the flesh, than to reveal a truth so potent it could lead others down the same perilous path. The silence in the Bible is not an omission, it is a seal, placed over a secret too volatile to be told. But what did these covenants truly entail? What words were spoken? What rituals were performed in those hidden temples under the dark of the Jerusalem moon? The clues point to ancient binding rites, ceremonies designed to create a legal spiritual claim over these entities. Imagine Solomon not as a king succumbing to passion, but as a spiritual strategist, standing in a circle of power, speaking the true names of these ancient spirits to bring them into submission. He believed his wisdom from God gave him the authority to do this, but he was about to discover that when you reach into the darkness often reaches back. The alternative version of this story is not one of lust, but of a chilling spiritual ambition. Imagine Solomon not in a banquet hall, but in a consecrated chamber deep beneath the temple. With each foreign princess, he was not merely signing a political treaty, he was enacting an ancient rite of covenant. The forgotten texts suggest each marriage was a spiritual acquisition. The wife was not just a woman, she was a living key, a gateway to the spiritual dominion of her homeland. Through the sacred bond of marriage, Solomon believed he could legally bind the prince, the ruling spirit, of that nation. This wasn't idolatry in the way we've been taught, it was a strategic attempt at spiritual conquest. He was building a web, a network of covenants designed to bring the gods of the nations to heel, to force them to bend the knee before the God of Israel. Think about the spiritual gravity of this. 1,000 covenants, 1,000 territorial spirits. Solomon wasn't just collecting wives, he was attempting to collect their gods, mapping the unseen world and trying to place it all under his God-given authority. The altars he built were not for worship, but for containment, spiritual embassies on holy ground where he could confront and control these ancient powers. The omission of this truth from the main biblical text was an act of spiritual protection. The prophets and scribes who chronicled Israel's history understood something we have forgotten. Knowledge is power, and some knowledge is too dangerous for human hands. To record that the wisest king of Israel engaged in rituals to bind principalities, using their secret names and sacred vows, would be to leave a roadmap for others to follow. It was safer to paint him as a fallen man, a lesson in human weakness, than to reveal him as a spiritual strategist whose ambition flew too close to the sun, blurring the line between divine wisdom and forbidden arts. But this raises a terrifying question. While God gave Solomon unparalleled wisdom, the Bible never says he gave him the blueprint for this spiritual war. The methods he used, the binding covenants, the summoning of entities to their altars, these practices echo the dark arts of the very nations he sought to conquer. It was a human plan executed with divine wisdom, and that is a dangerous combination. Solomon believed he was reinforcing God's sovereignty, but he was using the enemy's tools to do it. And in this shadowed realm of spiritual law, using a dark tool, even for a righteous cause, can leave a permanent stain on the soul. Where did he learn such things, and what was the true price of this forbidden knowledge? The story you have been told is simple, clean, and easy to preach. A wise king, weakened by the flesh, led astray by foreign women. It's a lesson in morality, a warning against temptation. But that is the public record, the version deemed safe for the congregation. The truth, the one that was intentionally buried, is not a story of moral failure, but of spiritual ambition that spiraled into darkness. The simple story was a veil, woven by human hands to cover a truth about God, man, and the unseen realm that was considered too terrifying to reveal. Why was it hidden? You must understand the burden that rested upon the prophets and scribes of ancient Israel. They were not just historians, they were spiritual guardians. They looked at the raw, unfiltered account of Solomon's spiritual war, his use of binding covenants, his construction of altars as strategic contact points, his dabbling in the very mechanics of the demonic, and they made a decision. They chose to protect the flock. It was far safer to present a cautionary tale about lust than to leave behind a detailed manual on how to engage with principalities and powers. The knowledge was simply too dangerous, a flame that could consume the uninitiated. Think of the great councils, the solemn assemblies where men of God gathered to decide which text would form the bedrock of our faith. They were drawing a line, building a wall between what was considered holy and what was deemed too perilous. On one side, the light of divine revelation, on the other, the shadows of forbidden knowledge. The full story of Solomon's gambit existed in those shadows. They decided that the risk of others trying to replicate his spiritual strategy was far greater than the value of telling the whole terrifying truth. They chose a simple lesson over a complex and dangerous reality.
This wasn't a simple omission. It was a deliberate act of substitution. The story of a fallen king was the perfect cover for the story of a king who reached for a power he could not control. They didn't want you to ask the hard questions. They didn't want you to know that the wisest man who ever lived sought a power that walked the razor's edge between the divine and the demonic. But this raises a chilling question that the simple story was designed to prevent you from ever asking. If this knowledge didn't come from God, where did Solomon learn it? The source of this forbidden knowledge is the most terrifying part of the secret. The Bible gives us the clue, but we have been trained not to see it. It points to his very first major foreign alliance, his marriage to the daughter of Pharaoh. Egypt was not just another kingdom. It was a civilization steeped in ancient, potent magic, a land that had a deep and functional understanding of the spirit realm, its laws, and its rituals. The knowledge Solomon used was not revealed from heaven. It was imported from the Nile, carried in the heart of a foreign queen, and planted in the sacred soil of Jerusalem. But that isn't the most shocking revelation. The ancient text suggests Solomon's wisdom was so profound, he believed he could do what no man had ever done before. He wasn't just learning from human teachers, he was using the wisdom God gave him to interrogate the darkness itself. The altars he built were not just points of containment, they were platforms for communication. He used these consecrated sites to summon and speak with the very principalities he sought to bind, to learn their names, their dominions, and their weaknesses. He was attempting to create an intelligence map of the enemy's kingdom. And there is something that almost no one dares to say. In these terrifying exchanges, Solomon didn't just take information, he was given something in return, a dark gift, a form of knowledge that mirrored the divine wisdom he already possessed, but was twisted, aimed not at worship, but at control. He was given the secrets of spiritual architecture, the formulas for creating structures that could channel and command unseen energies. He was given a blueprint. This is a truth that has been intentionally kept in the shadows, a layer of the story that requires discernment and a spirit willing to look beyond the veil. If you believe that understanding these ancient spiritual battles is crucial for our faith today, then I invite you to join our community of seekers by subscribing, because what Solomon was taught to build with this dark knowledge goes far beyond the simple altars mentioned in the Book of Kings, and it points to a secret hidden beneath the temple itself. This is where the story shifts from the historical to the theological, revealing a timeless truth not just about a king, but about humanity itself. The great conflict was never between the God of Israel and the stone idols of Chemosh or Moloch. The true war, the one that rages in every soul, is between divine will and human ambition. God gave Solomon a gift from heaven, unmatched wisdom, but Solomon chose to apply it using methods learned from the earth and from the shadows beneath it. This is the original temptation, the one that began in a garden, the desire to use God's gifts to achieve a human-designed outcome. The story of Solomon is the story of mankind, written in the golden ink of a king. We are created in God's image, granted dominion and the capacity for great wisdom. But with that gift comes a profound choice. We can operate within the holy boundaries God has set, or we can reach for forbidden tools in an attempt to seize a power that was never meant for us. Solomon, in his brilliance, believed he was the exception. He thought his wisdom was a shield that would allow him to touch the darkness without being stained by him, to wield the enemy's fire without being consumed. This is the ultimate spiritual pride, the belief that our intellect can outmaneuver a corruption that is ancient and absolute. Understanding this hidden history does not shatter the foundations of your faith, it reinforces them with steel. It proves that the Bible is not a collection of simple fables for children. It is a raw, unflinching account of a spiritual war that has raged since before time, a conflict far more complex than we are often taught. This knowledge wasn't hidden to weaken your belief, but perhaps to protect the unprepared from a truth too potent. It confirms that biblical warnings against idolatry were never just about bowing to statues. They were about trafficking with intelligent, ancient entities that actively seek to usurp the authority of God. And so Solomon stood at a crossroads, armed with wisdom from above and a blueprint from below. He was about to perform an act of spiritual engineering so daring it had to be scrubbed from the official record. He wasn't just building simple altars on the hills outside the city. He was using this dark, imported knowledge to construct something else entirely, something hidden, a structure designed to be a perfect, dark mirror of God's own dwelling place on earth. What was this unholy architecture, and what terrible power was it truly designed to channel? The dark architecture Solomon was building was not a collection of scattered altars on the hills of Judea. It was a single, unified system.
Using the forbidden knowledge, he attempted to construct a dark mirror of the tabernacle of God, a shadow temple, a spiritual prison designed to house 1,000 captive gods, with its unholy of holies located deep beneath the very foundations of the Temple Mount. He was not building a place of worship for them, but a throne of dominion for himself, a counterfeit mercy seat from which he believed he could rule the spiritual world, forcing it into submission under the God of Israel. With this truth revealed, his entire story is transfigured. The 1,000 women were not objects of his affection, but living keys, each one a spiritual conduit binding a specific principality to his subterranean throne. His idolatry was not an act of worship, but of maintenance. He was the warden of a spiritual prison of his own making, forced to perform the rites and rituals required to keep the chains locked and the prisoners contained. He did not fall into sin in a moment of weakness. He was crushed over decades by the immense spiritual weight of the unholy machine he had built.
This is the ultimate secret of Solomon, a truth so profound it had to be veiled. He tried to conquer the darkness by becoming its master, using its own tools of binding and control. Thousands of years later, another king would come from his own lineage. But this king, Jesus Christ, would face the same principalities and powers not with covenants of control, but with a covenant of blood. He did not build a throne to imprison them. He willingly went to a cross to disarm them. Where Solomon's wisdom led him to a hidden throne of power, Christ's obedience led him to an open display of sacrificial love. This is the final, unshakable truth. The kingdom of God cannot be built with the blueprints of the enemy. The power Solomon sought is a shadow. The power Christ demonstrated is the substance. Solomon, the wisest of men, shows us the pinnacle of human ambition and its ultimate failure. Christ, the wisdom of God made flesh, shows us that true dominion is not found in controlling the darkness, but in becoming a light that the darkness can never overcome. If you seek the hidden things of God, look not to the shadows of human power, but to the glorious revealed love of the cross, for there lies the only key that truly unlocks the mysteries of heaven and earth. This revelation changes everything. It reframes God's entire plan, not as a simple story of good versus evil, but a profound, divine narrative that allowed humanity's greatest wisdom to fail in order to prove that only God's own solution could ever succeed. Solomon's story wasn't an unexpected detour, it was a necessary lesson written in the heart of history. It was a demonstration for all time that no amount of human intellect, strategy, or ambition can conquer the darkness. God allowed the wisest man to try it his way, so that when the true king arrived, there would be no doubt that his way was the only way. The fact that you are hearing this now, that you have journeyed this far into the shadows of the past, is not an accident. This is not a truth for the spiritually complacent, or for those content with a faith that asks nothing of them. It is for the seeker, the one who has always suspected that the biblical world was more potent, more dangerous, and more real than the sanitized versions often presented. This knowledge was hidden for centuries, not to be lost forever, but to be revealed in a time when believers would be ready to look beyond the veil, to understand the true depth of the spiritual conflict we are in. And that is the core of our modern dilemma. We live in an age of shallow faith, of comfortable Christianity that avoids the difficult truths. We are handed simple moral lessons when we are starving for profound spiritual realities. The story of Solomon's secret war is a wake-up call. It screams from the ancient past that the unseen realm is not a metaphor. Principalities are real, spiritual law is real, and engaging with the darkness on our own terms with our own wisdom leads only to ruin. It forces us to ask, is my faith prepared for a reality this intense? This understanding is not meant to create fear, but to inspire awe for the holiness of God and the sheer brilliance of His plan of redemption through Christ. It is a call to move beyond a passive faith and embrace a vigilant one, armed not with forbidden knowledge, but with the divine wisdom revealed in the cross. This ancient secret doesn't just tell us about a king who fell, it tells us why we must cling to the king who conquered. What you have heard today is more than just a hidden chapter of history. It is a mirror held up to our own hearts, a profound question about the nature of our own faith. Do we seek to control the world around us with our own wisdom, our own strategies? Or do we surrender to the perfect sacrificial wisdom of the cross? This is the choice Solomon faced, and it is the choice we face every single day. Let this ancient truth settle deep within your spirit, and let it recalibrate your understanding of true spiritual power. For centuries, this perspective has remained in the shadows, sealed away in ancient texts and whispered only by a few. But we believe we are living in a time of revelation, a time when God is calling His people to awaken, to look beyond the surface and prepare for a reality far more profound than we have been led to believe.
The truth was not buried to be lost forever, but to be found by those who would have the eyes to see and the ears to hear in the appointed time. If this truth burns in your heart and has stirred something deep within your spirit, please leave a like to help this message reach others who are seeking. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you don't miss the truths we are uncovering next. And now we have a members area. By becoming a member, you bless this work and partner with us, helping us continue to produce edifying and revealing content just like this. Finally, please write in the comments where you are watching from so that we can see how far this revelation is reaching hearts across the nation and the world. May you walk forward from this day
armed not with the ambition of men, but with the humble, world-changing power of Christ, our true King, who holds the only key to every hidden thing.